Based on a video I did yesterday, which was regarding news out of the NHL and GMs maybe being a little mad about the way that the draft lottery works and how you could drop down all the way to fourth if you're the worst team in the league. Well, yes, but getting the number one draft pick, while it's important and it's good to have, it doesn't necessarily equal huge success. It may not equal success at all. So while at the time you may feel like your team kind of got gypped, in the end, you might get yourself Neil Patterson, and you go, "Oh, nah, never mind, never mind. All that stuff I said before, it doesn't matter. That's fine. No, it's fine." So what I've done is I've put the number one draft picks on the board, and I've gone through how the franchises have done since those draft picks. And if there's nothing written next to the team, it's because I've already got them written down. And then we'll get into this side of the board because there's more to it than just getting that number one draft pick and going, "Yes, now we're going to be a champion." 2015, the Oilers drafted McDavid. The farthest they've gotten since then is round 2. And while the Oilers may be seen as a team that could win a Stanley Cup, there are still a lot of question marks. And there's a lot of question marks because of how the team has been built around McDavid. And whether or not it's a championship caliber team or they're just relying on McDavid and Draisaitl. And depending on your point of view, you may say, nope, they're fine. They've got guys like Yamamoto. They've got Puljujarvi coming back. They've got guys who can score. They've got a decent enough defense. Or you may be of the mind that, it's still just the McDavid-Draisaitl show. So there's definitely divergent opinions on that. 2014, Aaron Ekblad is drafted by the Panthers. The furthest the Panthers have made it is round 1. Now, it may not seem entirely fair to Ekblad because of the number one draft picks. I can understand why some see him as being kind of weaker. But, Ekblad's a decent enough defenseman. The Panthers, not a team that's been built to win forever, it feels. 1996 was a long time ago. Nathan MacKinnon in 2013 was the number one draft pick of the Colorado Avalanche. And the furthest they've gone is round 2. Now, if you're wondering why the 2016 and after draft picks aren't on here, is because it takes a while for a team to draft and get better. So I think 5 years is the minimum that you can look at and go, all right, they drafted first overall, how have they done? And in Colorado's case, it really depends on how you look at it. They are right now looked at a team that should win a Stanley Cup next year. They're one of the top contenders. But there are definitely questions about that team around MacKinnon and whether or not they're built to win a championship. And until you win a championship, well, ask the Tampa Bay Lightning, who just won theirs, the kind of crap they've put up with for the last 12 months before they finally won their Stanley Cup. Then 2012, 2011, 2010, these are the years of the Oilers, Yakupov, Nugent-Hopkins, and Hall. If those drafts were done again, I guarantee you Yakupov wouldn't have been their first pick. I guarantee you Yakupov might have slipped right out of the first round. And Brian Burke's story about the interview that he had with Yakupov and how he and other scouts felt about Yak after talking to him, very, very entertaining. But the Oilers have struggled to build a team around those number one picks. So Hall was seen as being, Hall's the reason they're winning the draft lottery. No, the reason they're winning the draft lottery, the reason that they're always in the draft lottery, being the Oilers, was the team wasn't built well. It just wasn't being built properly. So if your team is we're going to try to get the number one draft pick at all costs, you're likely either Buffalo or Edmonton. Now, 2015, Buffalo and Edmonton were both kind of competing. The difference was Buffalo was actively trying to be the worst. Edmonton was just bad. And so that's been a problem. You'll notice Buffalo isn't on the board here with the number one draft pick in 2015 and before that, but they do have Rasmus Dahlin, who's a number one draft pick, so maybe that's their ace in the hole, right? And of course, Eichel is a number 2. Pretty good consolation prize right there. Now, famously, 2009, the New York Islanders, all in on Tavares. And this was the talk before that draft was, the Islanders now, they're all in on Tavares, and this is their chance. He is the guy. Now, the furthest this team has gone is to the 3rd round. They made the conference finals this year. But they did it after Tavares left. Tavares, of course, famously goes to Toronto rather than staying with the Islanders. And as soon as he leaves, the team gets better. Barry Trotz, Lou Lamoriello, they come together, and that brain trust makes the Islanders a much better team. And they did it without a number one draft pick. Now, they had first-round draft picks to get there, but they didn't have that number one overall. That guy went to Toronto. Steven Stamkos, 2008. Of course, the Lightning win the Stanley Cup this year. So we have a number one draft pick who wins the Stanley Cup. He played one game and he played 2 minutes of it. Right? So That's the issue with Stamkos that you're going to hear about here and there from people who didn't really pay much attention during the playoffs. Well, it doesn't count. I know, and many people will say the Lightning were playing for Stamkos as much as anything else. And his one game he appeared in, and that inspirational appearance as it was for those 2+ minutes, the team was really buoyed by that and by the goal he scored in that game. So I'm not going to say anything bad about Stamkos, but I will say, and it's hard to argue this, Tampa Bay would have won that Stanley Cup if Stamkos didn't play in that one game. So, yeah. Patrick Kane in 2007, the Blackhawks. They win the Cup in 2010. And we're going to come back to the Blackhawks because I know people will point to the Blackhawks and to the Penguins and say, well, those are teams that they just did a full rebuild. And again, it's because people want to make it look like it's easy. You could just build. You could just go get a Stanley Cup. Sort of like what Eugene Melnick's kind of trying to sell right now in Ottawa. Like, oh yeah, no, we expect to win a Stanley Cup 4 years from now. We just decided to just rip it all apart and then you just go back and win a Stanley Cup because it's that easy. So Kane makes it look like it kind of sort of is, but notice the Blackhawks aren't on the board again here. That's their number one draft pick. They drafted very, very well outside of that, and I'll prove that. Eric Johnson of the Blues, 2006. Well, the team won the Stanley Cup in 2019, but Johnson was nowhere to be found. Johnson, of course, gets traded to Colorado, team that has McKinnon on it. And so for Johnson, he's probably happy St. Louis won a Stanley Cup, but he wasn't there, so he's not that happy. Sidney Crosby in 2005, of course, for the Penguins. They win the Stanley Cup 4 years after that. Alex Ovechkin in 2004. They win the Stanley Cup in 2018, so it was 14 years after Ovechkin joins the team. And not only that, but the amount of changes to that Capitals roster over the 14 years to finally find that magical formula to win a championship was insane. Marc-Andre Fleury in 2003, he wins the Stanley Cup with the Penguins in 2009. I didn't have to put that next. Oh, that's fine. Rick Nash, Columbus Blue Jackets. They've made it to round 2. Did it after Nash left, actually. So they didn't win a round with Rick Nash. Nash, good goal scorer, solid all-around player. They didn't win a round with him. And again, it's not his fault that they never won a round with him. It's that you don't build a winning team around the player. If you get that great asset, you still need to build the team around him. 2001 is an ultimate example of that. Ilya Kovalchuk with the Thrashers. They, of course, get moved. The Jets have gone to round 3. Atlanta never got out of round 1. And Kovalchuk, when he went to New Jersey, it was clear he'd had enough of losing. He was done. He was tired of it. He was sick of it. And him leaving Atlanta was an example of how poorly run that franchise was, which is why they end up in Winnipeg. Everybody always throws shade at the city of Atlanta, like, look, they couldn't keep the team. It wasn't Atlanta, it was ownership. The ownership was an absolute disaster. Management was as well. This was a team that was managed as poorly as the Vancouver Grizzlies were when they were down the street. This was just a disaster, and it really is epitomized by the fact that they had Heatley, they had Kovalchuk, they had this great core. Eventually, Hossa comes in, Heatley goes out, but they just couldn't build anything winning around it. They couldn't get the starting goaltender they wanted. Lettinen was okay, but he didn't get to that level that they wanted him to get to until they traded him to Dallas. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for the Thrashers. So, and we can look back to their first draft pick of Patrick Stefan and say that was a mistake. But not putting a team around Kovalchuk that could win, I think, was a bigger mistake. And in 2000, Rick DiPietro. The New York Islanders, to get DiPietro, they traded away Luongo. Well, we don't need Luongo now. We've got DiPietro as our goalie of the future. We can trade Luongo to Florida and get back some of that scoring we need. It's a great idea. Didn't work out that way. So getting the number 1 draft pick is not as important as having a plan around that draft pick, which is why, while Detroit may not have been happy they didn't get Lafreniere, they got Raymond instead. The reality is you can still build to a Stanley Cup without that number 1 draft pick, or wherever you get that number 1 draft pick, it's less important than building that team around it. So 2020, this year, the Tampa Bay Lightning picks on their roster include, and if I miss anybody, I apologize wholeheartedly. 2015 third-round draft pick was Cirelli. That's a good mid-round draft pick. 2009 first, number 2 overall, Victor Hedman, drafted right behind Tavares. If the Islanders had drafted Hedman, who knows, right? Hedman would have looked pretty good in a New York Islanders jersey. I like Tavares. I would rather have Hedman, personally. 2015 fourth round draft pick was Joseph. 2007 third round draft pick was Killorn. 2011 second round draft pick, famously Nikita Kucherov. This is why, again, 2011, he's a second round draft pick. He would go number 1 overall to the Oilers if he redid that draft now. That's my guess. 2011 seventh round draft pick, Andre Palat. So the 2011 draft was an excellent one for Tampa, even though at the time the Oilers are getting all the attention for getting RNH. 2012 fourth round draft pick is Cedric Paquette. 2014 third round draft pick is Braden Point. 2008 the number 1 draft pick is Steven Stamkos. But again, Point, very unheralded, comes up, plays very well in a call-up. And I remember saying, this Braden Point kid's fantastic, and people saying to me, well, he looks good, but remember, there's a lot of injuries going on with Tampa. That was where all their centers were injured, and Point has to come up. And like, well, he's getting some ice time he's not going to get next year. And then he did. He was pretty good. Stevens, 2015 second-round draft pick, 2012 first-round draft pick was Andrei Vasilevsky. That's the draft Yakupov's in. So Vasilevsky, again, Tampa Bay, drafting later on in 2011 and 2012, absolutely steal the draft over the team that drafts first. And 2017 second-round draft pick was Volkov. I know he only appeared in the one game, but still, he's a draft pick that played on their roster. So we go back to the 2010 Blackhawks. And I want to look at the 2010 Blackhawks because that's where you could say, okay, so they did a rebuild. They get Kane in 2007, and that's their big jumping off point. All right, so in terms of looking at their roster and picking up the guys that were a part of that franchise at the time that they make that push, Cam Barker gets traded out to Minnesota during that year, so he doesn't get on the board. Crawford does, but there's an asterisk with Crawford because he didn't play that year. No, it was Antti Niemi that was their goaltender that year. So he was a 2003 second-round draft pick. Of course, he would play a key role in later Stanley Cups for Chicago. Hjalmarsson was a fourth-round draft pick in 2005. Duncan Keith was a second-round draft pick in 2002. So he was a second-round draft pick. Absolutely fantastic move by Chicago. 2003 first-round draft pick was Brent Seabrook. He's like 14th overall that year. Dave Bolland was a 2004 second-round draft pick for Chicago. Jonathan Toews, 2006 first-round draft pick. And that was the year Johnson goes first to the Blues. And it's Toews who was picked third that year. Brian Bickle, 2004 second-round draft pick. A 2004 eighth-round draft pick was Troy Brouwer. A 2003 ninth-round draft pick was Dustin Byfuglien. Byfuglien was playing forward and defense for Chicago during their cup run before the foobarring of the restricted free agent offers and him needing to be traded to save them cap space. But Byfuglien, I think he would have been in Chicago his whole career if they could have made it happen. In 2007, of course, the first round number 1 draft pick was Kane. But you can have, tremendous success with Chicago with Kane and Toews, sure, but without Byfuglien, without Keith, without Crawford, without Seabrook, without Hjalmarsson, without all these depth guys and other players picked up through free agency and trades. So I'm not even talking about how they add Hossa, which was the final piece in free agency, but just by the draft alone, it's easy to isolate on Patrick Kane and say, well, that's what gets Chicago their cups. And he was a huge part, but without that supporting cast, you end up in a Edmonton-Buffalo style situation where you have a guy who's really great on a team that might be middle of the road, might make the playoffs, but probably isn't going to be a contender. You get your contender by drafting well mid and late rounds and making your trades and your free agent moves that make sense. So, quick looks as well at other teams that won multiple Stanley Cups. Just looking at multiple Stanley Cups. 2012 LA Kings. Jonathan Quick was a number 72 draft pick in 2005. Drew Doughty was a number 2 draft pick in 2008. Same year as Stamkos. Doughty goes number 2. And the debate has been had before about, would you rather have Doughty or Stamkos? At this point in their career, I'd have to go with Doughty only because of Stamkos' ongoing injury problems, right? 2005, of course, that was the year that at number 11, Anze Kopitar goes to the Kings. So yes, Crosby, huge franchise player to the Penguins. Meanwhile, Kopitar goes at number 11 to the Kings. And while there were some concerns about his level of play because he was Slovenian and is this going to work, in the end it didn't really matter. he ends up being a pretty good player in the NHL anyways. And of course, 2003, their number 13 pick in that stacked 2003 draft was Dustin Brown. So without these core guys, well, the Kings probably don't win in 2012 or 2014, especially Quick in that 2012 run, and he's a number 72 pick. 2016 Pittsburgh Penguins, of course, Marc-Andre Fleury was a number 1 draft pick in 2003, right there, but he had 0 wins in 2016's Stanley Cup run. Jeff Zatkoff had 1 win. The other 15 went to Matt Murray, who was the number 83 pick in 2012. So yes, Marc-Andre Fleury has cup rings. That cup ring, he got courtesy of Matt Murray. He did make an appearance in those playoffs. It didn't go well. They went right back to Matt Murray. So yeah, that's how that went. Chris Letang was number 62 pick in 2005, the same year as Crosby. And, of course, Crosby 2005. And then Jake Gensel, who wouldn't play until the 2016-2017 season, was a number 77 pick in 2013. And he was a center that they moved to the wing. And, of course, Gensel, pretty key player for them, number 77 pick. And, of course, Evgeny Malkin, the number 2 pick in 2004. So, again, people look at Pittsburgh and they'll say, well, 03, 04, and 05, they draft 1, 2, and 1. But Fleury's role in the 2016 and 2017 Stanley Cups, he had a decent role in the 2017 Stanley Cup. But, again, it was a shared net between he and Matt Murray. And in 2016, it was Matt Murray's net. So, there is no silver bullet when you look for how to make a Stanley Cup champion. Because I've seen that often where it's, here's how you build a Stanley Cup champion. And what Tampa did this year was they mortgaged some of their future and some cap space in order to get tougher in their bottom 6. But they improved the depth of their team. And team depth is absolutely huge. And I think it's every bit as important as having that blue chip prospect. So, if your team has lost out in draft lotteries, recent or over the last 5 years since they changed the whole draft lottery thing after the 2015 debacle, where they said, yeah, okay, this is not working. And so they made it so that if you're last overall, you can't draft automatically first or second. You may draft as low as 4th. And I know it's a controversial way of doing things, but I think that if a general manager is smart, he can make moves where he doesn't need that number 1 draft pick. Again, Doughty in 2008, that's a number 2 draft pick overall. But the Kings, their smart moves came elsewhere as well. Because just with Drew Doughty, you don't win a Stanley Cup. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happen upon this video. And again, I wear Penguins for this. I give full credit to the Penguins. They know how to build a winner. They know how to get it done. They've won 5 Stanley Cups in the time I've watched hockey, which is the most of any team since I started watching hockey, which it's tied for the most. But, it's one of those things where I recognize that this franchise knows how to do a proper rebuild, and it's not just about getting that number 1 draft pick. It's about everything else you do outside of it. But again, let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.